Thank you. Thank you. I'm bringing out some water just in case I turn into a raisin in front of you guys. Defy society. I loved the theme for this evening because it reminded me of that quote, "Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently." Because to me, that's what defying society means, seeing things differently, not following the rules, but following your passions. I was asked to be here tonight to talk about arts and activism. I am an actor with a passion to combat human trafficking and save the elephants. But when I really had to look at what connected the dots for me between arts and activism, it came down to one thing: playing the odds. Because if you want to be someone who defies society, you need to figure out what it is in your life you're passionate enough to gamble on. I always knew I wanted to be an actor, but when I was starting out, I hated that everyone would say, "Oh, you want to be an actor? It's the hardest profession. You should do anything else." I always thought that being a brain surgeon would be hard, or a lawyer, or a social worker, or a teacher. Being a teacher, to me, seems like a monumental task. What I realized over time was it isn't necessarily acting that's the hardest thing, it's the lifestyle. It's being okay with the instability and the rejection and the fact that every now and then you're going to look in your bank account and there's going to be $4.09. Or in my case, after moving to New York to pursue my dreams of Broadway, being misdiagnosed for almost a year and having to go straight into surgery to remove a polyp in my head the size of a tennis ball. Kind of derailed things. At the time, there was only one 11-year-old boy who had one bigger than me. So sometimes things aren't totally going to go the way you plan them to. But if you're passionate enough about it, you're going to stay on the roller coaster. So, luckily, I ended up getting recruited into a modeling agency, and that was going to end up paying my medical bills a hell of a lot faster than bartending. So I ended up modeling, and that snowballed into a commercial career for me. And if you're wondering if my face seems somewhat familiar, it's probably because at this point I have sold you nearly every item in your household on television. I have been lucky enough to kiss Tom Selleck and Mark Paul Gosselaar and Charlie Sheen on television. And while I would love to get a regular gig on a TV show, my commercial campaigns have allowed me the financial freedom and flexibility to pursue my other passions. So a few years ago, I was asked to be ambassador to an organization that was using the entertainment and fashion industry as their platform to spread education and awareness of human trafficking. I had always had an interest in human rights, specifically women's rights, and I had supported organizations working to end the virgin cleansing myth and female mutilation. And those were fairly intense subjects, so human trafficking didn't seem like that much of a stretch for me. But if you're going to talk about human trafficking, you're going to take playing the odds to an entirely new level. Because most people would see these statistics and run the other way. The internet has made it so easy to exploit children that 70% of child sex trafficking victims are sold online, which is why just last week we saw Ashton Kutcher making a plea to Congress to help fund the technology they've developed to stop online traffickers. And just to bring it a little closer to home, Newport Beach sits in between San Diego and Los Angeles, two of the FBI's highest child sex trafficking areas in the nation. So I don't say this to scare you, but just to point out, if it was your child that went missing, wouldn't you play the odds? while I was ambassador, I ended up spearheading a crowdfunding campaign we named Hope to Thailand. We went and visited multiple rescue and rehabilitation centers there. We wanted to support the NGOs doing the frontline work on the ground. And while I would love to talk about each and every one of them, that would be a whole other talk. So just one of the things that I did was I ended up teaching a couple of jewelry making workshops. And I taught to girls roughly aging between 11 and 17. We were operating on the premise of give a man a fish to eat, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. One of the most important parts of rehabilitation for a trafficking survivor is vocational training, because if you don't have another way to sustain yourself, the chances of you being re-trafficked are extremely high. One of the little girls that was in one of the workshops I taught had been re-trafficked 9 times. So human trafficking has been dubbed the modern-day slavery of our time, and although the term human trafficking umbrellas child trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and organ trafficking, 80% of that are women, and half of that are children. So this is where my passion as a women's rights advocate comes into play. Now, there's a lot going out around about feminism at the moment, and I just want to point out that feminism is not just about women. The UN is working extremely hard to promote women's healthcare, education, and equal pay because studies have proven that this is what's going to fuel sustainable economies and benefit societies globally. And if that doesn't mean that much to you, it essentially means that if your wife is paid the same as the guy sitting next to her doing the same job, you aren't going to have to work so hard for that vacation at Disneyland. So feminism is really about helping all of us. Which brings me to one of my favorite subjects. Elephants. I know, crazy. This girl, she's talking about polyps and feminism. Here's how I'm going to link human trafficking and elephants in 1 second. Most of us might remember this hashtag when it circulated a few years ago. If you don't, in 2014, 276 girls were kidnapped in the middle of the night and taken by Boko Haram in Nigeria. Human trafficking and elephant conservation are inextricably linked because most of Boko Haram and the other terrorist organizations committing these type of atrocities are funded by illegal ivory and rhino horn poaching. So if you care about a little girl but not an elephant, you should. You also should care about an elephant because they are the most loving, emotional, family-oriented large mammals on Earth. They laugh, they cry, they play, they hug each other with their trunks when they see each other. Their babies are just as silly and naughty as human toddlers, and they flail their trunks around trying to figure out how to use them. It's hilarious. But because an elephant's gestation period is 2 years, they're being slaughtered at a higher rate than they can reproduce. 100 elephants a day. So the numbers have shown that in less than 10 years, elephants in the wild will no longer exist. A few years ago, it was, a projected 10 years. It's less than 10 years now. This is because poachers want elephants and rhinos to go extinct so that the price of ivory and rhino horn goes up. So as much as I don't want to admit it to you, we're fighting a losing war. And here's where playing the odds matters. If I know I'm fighting a losing war, do I still fight? If I know that we can only save one girl or one elephant and not the thousands of others in that moment, do we still try? See, I believe that we do, because it's at that exact moment in time you decide which side of history you want to be on. Complacency is the norm of society at the moment, and if we go back to our theme of the evening, Defy Society, we're going to see that the definition of defy means to openly resist or refuse to obey. And this is where we have to resist complacency, because complacency leads to stagnation, and human beings by nature long for evolution. So there's a lot of issues going on in the world today, and one of the reasons why I think that is something is hindering evolution. Something is stopping us from moving forward. See, when they say resist, you can be on one of two playing fields, one that moves us forward or one that moves us back. Resistance goes in both directions. So again, I say to you, which side of history do you want to be on? Now, your gamble may not pay off right away. Nothing changes overnight, and there are examples throughout history of big wins, but the women's suffrage movement began in the 1840s, and women didn't earn the right to vote until 1920. And even though women won the right to vote in 1920, black women couldn't vote until the 1960s. And then Moonlight won, and we made a few steps forward, but we won't go there. See, I believe that if just one of us is enslaved, we all are. And I believe that if you can have an effect on just one person, that's going to eventually add up. This little boy stood from afar, was watching one of the jewelry workshops I was teaching, and he was so shy, but he finally snuck up and sort of sat down quietly beside me, and he picked up the tools I was teaching with, and he picked it up so fast and put together such a great combo of beads that he chose that before the day was over, he had sold 3 pairs of earrings while I was still sitting there. Now, some might say, who cares, Kelly? You left. Was it really worth teaching that workshop? Do I think that I solved any big problems that day or issues? No, absolutely not. But I think about that little boy often, and I wonder if he continued making jewelry and possibly found a new way to sustain himself or his family, because there is 1 in a million chance he did, and I'd rather play those odds. So, there's going to be big wins and there's going to be small wins. And sometimes you're going to have a polyp in your head the size of a tennis ball. But to be someone who defies society, you're going to have to stay on the roller coaster ride one way or another. So I ask you, what passion do you have in your life that's going to give you the courage to play the odds, that's going to make you step up and roll the dice? Thank you.